Hi everyone and welcome to Empowered Living. My name is Jonas Kane. As a member of the Empowered Living community and the John Maxwell team, Paul and Roddy asked if I would take some time today to talk with you folks about the first level of happiness. In the model that I use, there are 5 different levels of happiness, but for our purposes, we're going to hone in on just the first level because it's truly foundational for living an engaged, empowered, and encouraged life. And this is so important because so often in life, what we think will make us happy simply won't, because things are not always as they appear. There's a classic example of this that comes to us from the magic world, and perhaps you've seen this before. It comes in all of the beginner magic kits with a card with a dot on one side. The other side has 4 dots. This side has 3 dots, and the last side has 6 dots. And this would be an amazing trick if you didn't already know how it's done. And it doesn't help that I already explained to you that things are not always as they appear. I can show you there's 1 dot, or I can show you there's 3, depending on how I hold the card, depending on the perspective that we choose to look at the situation. The other side works the same way. I show you that there's 4, or I can show you that there's 6. Again, depending on how I hold the card, depending on the perspective that we choose to look at the situation. This is so important because when we forget that how we look at the world will shape our experience of the world, when we forget this, we can get really caught off guard. Like when all the dots disappear and reappear over here. Isn't this fun? And it's truly an encouraging thought too. In fact, when I got started on this path of being a coach, a trainer, a facilitator, and teacher, when I started on this path, it was because I was called to encourage others to truly come alive, live lives of passion so we can collectively work together to make this world a brighter place. But I realized very early on that however amazing encouragement is, it's just not enough. Because it's not enough to say to someone, you can do it. Because they very well perhaps can't do it. Or perhaps just not yet. So before we can encourage people, before we can say you can do it, we have to first empower them. Before saying you can do it, we have to first show them how they can do it. And this is all about, it's about being empowered. It's about gaining access to knowledge and skills and resources. And this is what empowered living is all about. It's a lifelong process. And I can remember clearly the day that I became committed to the empowered life. I was on a retreat in Wisconsin. I was all alone. I was in this little cabin by a secluded lake. And on the last day of this trip, it was simply beautiful. On the last day of this trip, I was sitting on the shore with my feet in the water. And I didn't dare swim in the lake, by the way. I didn't dare do that because I was alone. And I know that the dangers of swimming alone. I was trying to be safe. So I was sitting on the shore, and all at once, everything became so clear. I had my aha moment. And it came in the form of a question. I thought to myself, fascinating. What else am I sitting on the shore of? Because I don't have someone with me to show me the way. And I knew immediately what the answer was. It's this. It's what I'm doing today. I knew what the answer was. It was within me this whole time. And in fact, I answered this question by filling my notebook with all of the answers, all of the ideas and the thoughts that I had about how to get this plan into action, to move forward with it. And when the plane landed, I began looking for coaches and mentors and teachers, people who could encourage me, but more importantly, empower me with the knowledge and skills and resources I needed to get off that shoreline and swim in the waters of my destiny. And so, and that's what brought me to the Empowered Living community. That's what brought me to the John Maxwell team. And my life has truly been blessed ever since. And it's so tempting at this point to say then, based on everything we've just discussed, that happiness, the road to happiness starts with empowerment. It's tempting to say this, but it's just not enough. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Because it's one thing to have access to knowledge, skills, and resources. And I use that word access intentionally here. It's one thing to have access to them, and it's another thing to use them. Because what's the point of being told something if we're not listening? If we're not paying attention, if we don't care, and here's the key word, if we're not engaged. Engagement is the power, is the key that truly makes empowerment possible, which unlocks encouragement. And these 3 E words, engagement, empowerment, and encouragement, work together to form what I call the 3 E's of positive influence. And this influence truly goes in all directions. A positive influence for ourselves when we ask ourselves, what can I do to be engaged, empowered, and encouraged? But also goes to the people who follow us and to our peers, as well as the people who lead us. We can be a positive influence for them as well. And this brings us to today's topic of the first level of happiness. Because if we accept this notion that to be encouraged, we have to be empowered, and to be empowered, we have to be engaged. If we accept this, the question becomes, well, what do we do to become engaged? Or what do we do to stay engaged? Or what do we do to engage the people who we influence? And this brings us to the ground floor of happiness. It's not even the first level of happiness, it's the ground floor of happiness, because it shares the same ground floor as unhappiness. And it comes to us from a study that was done recently, not long ago, that showed that 50% of our lives is completely out of our control. It's our DNA. We can't control who our ancestors are. It's the weather. It's the emotions, thoughts, feelings, words, and actions of others. We can't control these things, so we might as well, and here's the key word, we might as well accept them. We can't control these things, so we might as well accept them. And from here, we can either become frustrated and just give up, or we can choose to become fascinated and build ourselves up. And that's the key word. If you have a pen and paper handy, I encourage you to write this down. If you're on your computer, take out a note-taking app or something on your phone or your tablet. Write this down. The first level of happiness is fascination. And you might even want to phrase it as a question. Are you frustrated or are you fascinated? And the difference is this. When we're frustrated, we wish for a brighter future, but we're not interested in doing anything about it. In fact, if anything, we might ask the following questions. We might say to ourselves, why this? Why me? Why now? Right? We ask all these defeating questions. But when we're fascinated, we hope for a brighter future, and then we get into motivated action to do something about it. And we ask decidedly different questions. Instead of saying, why this, we say, how can I use this? Instead of saying, why me, we ask, what can I bring to the table? Or to word it another way, how can I serve? And instead of saying, why now, you might ask, well, if not now, when? 50% of our lives is out of our control. We can choose to be frustrated by this and give up, or fascinated by this and build ourselves up. The key, though, is to remember that we all get frustrated from time to time. The key, though, is to not stay there. It's okay to visit the frustration, but it's not okay to stay there, because it's truly a slippery slope. So if you haven't written these questions down yet, I encourage you to do so. The next time you find yourself slipping into frustration for too long, ask yourself these questions. Number 1, how can I use this? Number 2, how can I serve? Number 3, if not now, when? Fascination is the first level of happiness. I'm going to leave you folks with one final encouraging thought, and it comes to us from the same study that found that 50% of our lives is out of our control. It showed that 10% of our life we do have some influence over. It's our circumstances, it's our friends, it's our hobbies, it's where we work, it's where we live. These are things that we do have some control over, it, which can be quite encouraging. But the really encouraging part comes from the fact that the remaining 40% of our lives we have full control over. So if we lost the lottery with the other 50%, if we lost the lottery with the other 10%, well, this other 40% can be a real game changer. It's our choices. It's how we respond to the things that happens to us. It's how we respond to the things that we can't control. Yes, frustrations will happen, but how long will you stay there? How long will you continue drinking that poison? Personally, myself, I remember I went through a period of my life where I drank the poison of frustration for a full 3 years. And it all started in the summer of 2007. I had just asked the woman of my dreams, the love of my life, the woman I had been in love with for 8 years, I asked her to marry me. And she said yes. If you've ever laid yourself out there, just laid it all out there for the world to see. And if that person accepts it and they embrace you, oh my goodness, then you know how I felt. And this was such an amazing experience. This was the happiest time of my life. And to this day, even though it's been 13 years, I can still see her smiling face, her big smile as she says yes. But then a week to the day later, after this happiest moment of my life, very randomly and without warning, Stephanie died. That morning, she just didn't wake up. This was a heavy frustration. This was a heavy one. And I became convinced that I was going to die too, from a broken heart. And when I didn't die, I became so angry, I became so frustrated that I turned to alcohol to do it for me. At the time, I was 24 years old, never had a drink in my life, but overnight, my life changed. And so after experiencing this for 3 years of drinking this poison of frustration, of grief, the poison of depression, the poison of suicide, a new thought started to emerge towards the end of this 3-year period. And the only way I can really describe it is this. It's that when we have a fixed mindset, when we believe that the world just the way it is, when we believe that we are just who we are, that when we have this limited perspective that this is the only way that life is going to work, we're going to be disappointed and frustrated every time because things are not always as they appear. And even when things are exactly as they appear, circumstances change. And one of the primary reasons why people fail is by failing to change when their circumstances change, right? So after experiencing this dark night of the soul for 3 years, I began to become curious about what life might really be about. I began to wonder about experiencing new things, and I became fascinated about all the possibilities that up until that moment I had been blind to. Fascination is the first level of happiness. So if today you've been experiencing frustration, I encourage you to ask these high quality questions with fascination. Ask, how can I use this? How can I serve? Because if not now, when? It has been a true joy having this opportunity to be with all of you. If you'd like to learn more about my work, I encourage you to visit my website, #positivity.com. And until next time, my name is Jonas Kane. Stay fascinated.